absolutely.
So I think that's what, when we come and look at the Muslim ban, the point here is that going back to a sober understanding that the rich really rule the country, and as we talked about the Princeton study, anyone wants to go check it out can just Google Princeton study oligarchy, it'll come up right away.
Yeah.
The point is that the Muslim ban goes actually against their interests, and so the likelihood of it being something that's passed or something that's actually implemented is quite low, because it actually goes against their interests for these reasons.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why it's so, like you said, that's why it's heartening to see. Like, I was so excited as you were when I saw the protests. Right. These people saying that Trump's not my president. The raw activism pouring out onto the streets.
Absolutely.
And it was so good to see the people awake.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me because I don't know what you think about this, but there's already reports coming out. Because what's beautiful about this and what's going to be really satisfying is that you have a particular segment of society that felt forgotten, ignored, etc. Working class whites is what they're being called. It gets more complicated than that if you break everything down. It's easy for the media to, quote everything racially or economically. It's obviously much more complex. But you have a segment of people who are rightfully, horrified at what the American system has become. And for them, Trump is their guy. He's going to do things that no one else can do because he's an outsider. Right? He's not like the others. But then you look at it, right? You just look at him now. He hasn't even done anything yet, right? But you look at him now. Every Trump supporter I've spoken to was proud of the fact that he stayed out of the war. He said that we shouldn't have been a part of the war in Iraq, right? This was something that every Trump supporter I've spoken to, they've all been very proud of this fact. Yet every single person who's now part of his team, people who are being proposed or leaked, their names are being leaked to be proposed to be part of his, his cabinet. People like John Bolton, people like Rudy Giuliani, people like Sarah Palin. I don't know if I'm really hoping Sarah Palin comes back to the national stage just to really add a cherry on the top of this dumpster fire. But it would be really, really interesting if she came back. So I'm hoping for it personally. But these were all people who supported the war in Iraq. John Bolton is the architect of the war in Iraq. He almost that's like having Dick Cheney as your Secretary of State. He's just not as well known for being for it as Dick Cheney was. Plus, Dick Cheney just scares people. It's just how he is, right?
Yeah.
Bolton's just seems a little nicer. But it's the same thing. So for someone who's going to talk about global elites and how he's going to put America first, these are not people who put America first.
Right.
These are not people who cared about American lives when they threw them and wasted them away, in some, completely other part of the world for absolutely no discernible interest of the American people.
Right. Yeah,
it was just for their personal enrichment and for their personal power struggle in that region.
Right.
And he's loaded these people around him. Ask Giuliani where he stood on the war in Iraq. Ask Bolton what his role in the war in Iraq was. This is a job for Trump people to do that now. If you really believe in your vision, I disagree with it. I disagree with your vision. But even if you really believe in it, at least hold him accountable to it, because he's already failing. I've already heard reports that even the wall, the one thing that he was the most known for, there's some reports coming out on Reuters and stuff like that apparently they're talking about it being more of a fence than a wall.
Right.
Because a wall would obstruct the actual field of vision of border agents, because they wouldn't be able to properly police it. And so they're saying now, maybe a double fence, have some, border patrol around it, beef up the border. That's not what he promised. That's not what he promised his people at all. They wanted a wall. Even Hillary Clinton was for a fence.
Right.
It's not the same thing.
Right.
And so what I'm looking forward to is just seeing his people realize what the Democrats have already realized through the Hillary Clinton-Bernie Sanders struggle, which is how rigged the system is.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they realized that their outsider became part of the establishment, started listening to the Boltons and the Giulianis and the I guess Sarah Palin's, I don't know if I'd consider her part of the elites, but to listen to that logic, when he brings in the Wall Street, financiers and sits down with them and starts cutting deals, and when he backs out of this wall, it's going to be interesting to see where their disillusionment reaches.
Yeah, and that'd be interesting. That I think that's one of the things that's always been lacking in the political landscape, is a real sort of discussion and communication between these kind of, you have the right wing, sort of the Gothic South, and then you have the, sort of the liberals, where if they actually sat down and talked, they would create a very different country.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. They would be able to express ideas in a way that no one wants them to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody wants a Bernie supporter and a Donald Trump supporter to sit down and actually have a conversation with each other.
Yeah.
And so they use these code words like socialist and racist and this and that to make sure it never happens.
And that's that's an important thing, that although I think that we have this real politique, the reality is that Trump, with his rhetoric, has ratcheted up the hatred against Muslims, Mexicans, and other people of color. There was a study that was done in California State University where saw the anti-Arab racism go up 219%. Against Muslims, it went up 89%. So this is a real phenomenon, and this is through the election kind of cycle.
So in the past year and a half, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Right, and anyone can go to the website and download the study, and I think that when we look at society, it's not just it's not just these powers. It's not just these kind of autonomous power structures. It's also that kind of medium we all swim in. And so when we see these kind of racist, kind of racial hatred, as we discussed at the outset, this is something real that the Muslims are facing. But you know what? I mean, there's a lot of anti-Semitic attacks. There's a lot of attacks against Black people, Latinos. That's sort of just normal in America, right? Mm-hmm. And this kind of encampment where you have one group against another, it's just another front has opened where it's Muslims versus non-Muslims, right?
Yeah.
And that's gonna be us kind of paying the price, right, for this thing. But in that sense, as this is something the elites have always seen as advantageous, because when people are distracted by these kind of these kind of factions, the same way like Firaun also had the same kind of idea where you pit one faction against the other.
Yeah.
It's a similar type of problem that they have in the U.S. where we're distracted with each other when the issues are much deeper. And this is something that we should be aware of, that the real rise of Trump comes from the economic devastation that everyone really is feeling, whether it's blacks, whites, but of course the sector that went to a vote in Trump is the poor whites.
Yeah, for sure. And I think to kind of, because there's always the focus of people who are, the focus of Muslims anyway, who are trying to cause a positive change in the world, who are trying to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do in the Quran, which is to enjoin good and forbid evil, is always to be hopeful, right? It's never to feel like the victim. It's to never let ourselves be engulfed by whatever is around us, but to always have that sense of hope. There's an amazing story of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he sent. It was at a time when Medina was under siege. So his city, the place where all the Muslims at the time, it was the only safe space for them in the world, pretty much, except for a few other cities here and there. It was the center of Islam, and it was being attacked by all their neighbors. They decided to finally wipe out this movement, and one of the portions of the city were supposed to be held by a non-Muslim tribe, and there was a fortress around there, and they were supposed to keep up the fortress because they were allies with the Muslims, even though they weren't Muslims themselves. And the idea was that if the Confederates, the enemies, try to come in through the fortress, they won't be able to, because there'll be this non-Muslim tribe holding down the fort. Except that non-Muslim tribe had betrayed the Muslims and was actually willing to open up the fort. And the Prophet had heard about this, and he was concerned, but he wasn't sure it had happened. So he sent some scouts over to check it out. And they went and they checked it out, and they realized, they've left. Like, the fortress is open. Like, our women and children can be attacked, like, at any point. And they came back, and they told the Messenger of God, this has happened. And you could see on their face just how devastated they were, because this is their women and children in that city. And the only thing he says to them after he's heard what they've said, absorbed it, he says, "Upshur, cheer up. Have hope, be happy. What are you depressed about?" And of course he knows what they're depressed about. He's must be concerned as well, of course.
Right, of course.
His entire household is in Medina as well. But it's that place where we never let that happen, right? And for me, I think what I'll kind of this is something a friend of mine shared on Facebook and I found really interesting. The Marxist, absurdist philosopher, kind of nihilistic, very anarchist, Slavoj Zizek, his name is, I believe. I think he's Russian, I think. He was asked about, the whole election, right? About how you feel about Clinton and Trump. And he actually said, I think people should vote for Trump, which, I don't agree with. But his reasoning was that it's better to have something that is openly, dangerous than to have something that is secretly dangerous. It is better to have something interrupt the entire way things are done, so you know what you're fighting against, as opposed to just have someone who's going to continue the same system, but you're going to feel it's okay.
Right.
And he said that's kind of where he's coming at it from. And so if Muslims especially, and anybody in America, and anybody anywhere in the world who's going through political turmoil, because we all are, but anybody in America should feel is that this is a chance to really take the system as it is and do something about it, as opposed to live in these half lies and, oh well, yeah, she's not as bad. No, let's work through everything, and let's change everything about what's going on.
And that's an important point, because in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He always addresses people based on their mental faculties as people who think, and that this will give rise to people who think, right? And this will, I think, when we see those people coming out in the streets, and it's a sign of thought, right? And people's minds are open, and it's for us to go there and to talk to them. And we in Hamilton, we have that booth we do, during the summer, which is during our crawl, Ask a Muslim.
Yeah.
And that's a great example of how we can reach out to the community and get their ideas, and to open and have that dialogue and to discuss. And to your point about hope, I know like this woman actually learned about Islam through Trump's racist rhetoric and actually became a Muslim, right? And so it's like what you said is in terms of the hopefulness, and so reaching out. This is our golden opportunity. Minds are open. People are discussing. People are wondering where the solution is, and I think that is to engage on that. Like Islam has complete comprehensive solutions about economics, which address like a interest-free system, and so it's really important to go out there and talk to people about these kind of topics and show how Islam addresses these problems in a very unique and fresh way.
Yep. and
to engage and start people thinking, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it's about having those conversations and to show the how Islam has these capacities, and so they see a different side than what they're being fed from the mainstream media.
And I think I think the goal of that discussion is never. Of course, we always want to invite people to Islam as a way of life. We always want to explain to them why we're Muslim and why we believe this is the truth and why we believe they should be Muslim as well. But I think sometimes we can miss if our focus is just to get people to agree with us. I think sometimes we're missing the larger point.
Right.
We've presented the message, and that's enough. But even if they don't end up agreeing with us, at least they can have respect for where we're coming from.
Right.
And if we really want to talk about destroying Islamophobia, if we really want to talk about destroying any kind of phobia, it's being able to respect where another person's coming from and understanding why they believe what they believe and what their thought process is. And if we can do that much, I think it'll be impossible for any demagogue or for any person who wants to spread hatred to be able to attack a community that people see fundamentally as worthy of respect. Yeah. So I think that should be the goal of the Muslims over the next 4, 5, 8, however many years this dumpster fire decides to keep burning. So I think that would be the takeaway here.
So that's our episode for this week. We hope to join soon for our next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.